This episode is brought to you by CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service that offers thousands of documentaries and non-fiction titles from some of the world's best filmmakers, including exclusive originals like Stalking Hitler's Generals, when Allied commandos launched daring wartime missions to kill or capture German generals, and Secret Societies, organizations that play a far larger role in our everyday lives than most of us realize. From the Illuminati to Freemasons and Skull and Bones. Go to curiositystream.com/Mark Felton for unlimited access to the world's top documentaries and non-fiction series. And for our fans, use the promo code Mark Felton and you will save 25% off, which comes to only $14.99 a year. That's just $1.25 per month. For the very best in history programming, choose CuriosityStream. 77 years ago today, the Germans' Ardennes Offensive began. But even as the huge offensive started, US soldiers were already being taken prisoner in their hundreds, as a terrible battle to secure the Germans' northern flank ended the same day Hitler struck west. This is the story of the forgotten first battle of the Ardennes campaign, Kesternich. The Ardennes Offensive surprised the Allies, who thought Germany lacked the military capacity to do anything other than try and defend its western border from the rapidly advancing British, Canadian, American and French armies, since the loss of most of France in the late summer of 1944. Germany was also extremely hard-pressed in the east as the Red Army juggernaut pushed on towards the Reich. But Hitler gambled on a huge surprise offensive in the west through the poorly defended Ardennes region of Belgium and Luxembourg to perhaps bring the Western Allies to the negotiating table. The two-pronged offensive would slash northwest towards the Meuse River and on to the main Allied supply port at Antwerp. Capturing the port would split the US and British armies from each other and cut off their supplies, not to mention causing the encirclement of several US divisions. The Western Front had already witnessed intensive fighting around the city of Aachen, the first German city to be reached by Allied forces, but the Germans were maintaining a stubborn and skillful defence of the Hürtgen forest and other areas of the Siegfried Line defences that had sucked the Americans and other Allies into painful battles of attrition. By December 1944, the US 12th Army Group was still stuck at the Ruhr River, the last natural obstacle before the River Rhine. The small village of Kesternich now became very important. A settlement of just 112 buildings, Kesternich sat along the Ruhr Valley, close to the huge dams, the Schwammenöl and Oeft. The Americans needed to capture the dams because they controlled the level of the River Ruhr. The Germans could open the dams and flood the entire US front line, preventing an American advance perhaps for weeks. Two US infantry divisions, the 78th and the 2nd, had launched assaults via an area of well-defended German front called the Monschau Corridor, near the town of the same name, across farmland full of little villages like Kesternich and Siegfried Line bunker systems. In Phase 1 of the attack, the villages of Kesternich and Zimmerath would have been captured. Then US forces would assault the next settlements beyond until eventually tackling the Schwammenöl Dam. Kesternich was also important to the Germans because it was located on what would be the northern flank of the forthcoming Ardennes Offensive. The loss of the Monschau Corridor could imperil the entire operation. Kesternich and the other positions had to be held, whatever the cost, or Hitler's grand final offensive would be severely threatened. The American attack jumped off on the 13th of December 1944, just 3 days before the German offensive began, which the Allies were not fully aware was coming. The 78th Infantry Division, under Major General Edwin P. Parker, made the assault on Kesternich, about 15 miles southeast of Aachen. The 309th Infantry Regiment's 2nd Battalion ran into thick minefields and was then mortared mercilessly by the Germans. Attached to 2nd Battalion were Shermans of the 709th Tank Battalion. German anti-tank guns picked off the American tanks as they struggled across the snowy and muddy fields. Some infantry managed to make it to Kesternich, but were immediately cut off with no communications and without tank support. So ended the first day of the battle for Kesternich. Many U.S. soldiers were casualties, including 2nd Battalion's commanding officer, Lieutenant Colonel Wilson L. Burley, who died early the following day. The 14th of December was another bloodbath. Command sent in the 2nd Battalion 310th Infantry Regiment to reinforce the Americans beleaguered in Kesternich. Commanding officer Lieutenant Colonel Byron W. Ladd was ordered to capture and clear the village, then block all roads into the town from the east. No proper reconnaissance was made before the attack. 2 companies with a platoon of tank destroyers made the assault. As the infantry came across the snowy fields, German machine guns mowed them down. Many GIs also stepped on mines. German artillery now opened up, also hitting the reserve company following behind the attacking force. The 3 US infantry companies were hit very hard. The attack was halted at dusk. Attempts were made to evacuate the wounded. In total, the 2nd Battalion 310th Infantry Regiment had suffered a staggering 25% casualties in one day of action. In Kesternich, the remnants of the trapped U.S. forces from 2nd Battalion 309th Infantry fought on bravely, with 40 men still standing. German fire remained intense. However, during the night of the 14th to 15th of December, patrols of GIs in Kesternich managed to meet up with patrols from the attacking 310th Infantry. By now, higher command was demanding that General Parker sort this mess out. Parker reorganized his command. At dawn on the 15th of December, the 2 badly depleted companies of the 310th Infantry that had attacked earlier were sent in again, reaching Kesternich this time and beginning house-to-house fighting with German defenders. A tank platoon also reached Kesternich, but the Germans knocked out 3 tanks and the rest withdrew, before returning later with some tank destroyers in support. The confused, exhausted and dazed U.S. infantry had captured many buildings in Kesternich, but the defense was not properly organized or coordinated. The Germans had looked at the situation for some time with growing alarm. Defending the area was the understrength 272nd Volksgrenadier Division. Its commander, Generalmajor Eugen König, was told in no uncertain terms that Kesternich had to be retaken, or the Ardennes Offensive, due to commence at dawn on the 16th, would be imperilled. The German counterattack began at 3:30 p.m. on the 15th of December. Firstly, German artillery pounded the U.S. positions on the eastern side of Kesternich, then shifted to the west as hundreds of infantry came pouring out of nearby woods and advanced on the Americans, supported by 3 Hetzer tank destroyers and a Flakwagen. The Germans took the Americans completely by surprise. The artillery barrage had severed all field telephone cables, and due to the darkness that had already descended in the late afternoon, the US forward artillery observers couldn't see the enemy. The Germans poured into the village, and the US troops began to withdraw under fire, except for about 70 men who held onto a few buildings in the village's western side. On the morning of the 16th of December 1944, as the massive German artillery preparation began hammering US positions, laying in the path of the German columns about to penetrate the Ardennes, the 70 Americans holding out in houses in Kesternich were hit hard, the surviving 56 surrendering shortly afterwards. The German battalions pushed on, threatening all the US company positions. Many units simply disappeared. Isolated groups of Americans fought on into the afternoon of the 16th, but the 2nd Battalion 310th Infantry was destroyed. 79 men were killed, 105 wounded, and 300 missing, most captured. The 2nd Battalion 309th Infantry was also badly cut up. In 3 days of fighting at Kesternich, the 78th Infantry Division had lost over 1,000 men. The German 980th Grenadier Regiment of the 272nd Volksgrenadier Division secured the area, in the process capturing huge amounts of American equipment, vehicles, and supplies, which they were happy to use. The German northern flank had been secured in the nick of time as the Ardennes Offensive got underway, smashing through the US front at several points and surrounding thousands of GIs in pockets that fought on stubbornly until overwhelmed and taken prisoner. Though the Ardennes Offensive would run out of steam in a few days, as stubborn US resistance wrecked the Germans' timetable, the first few days were very rough for the Americans, and for a week or so the Germans rode high on the kinds of victories and advances it hadn't witnessed in years. As Kesternich showed, and the wider German offensive confirmed, the German military was still a force to be reckoned with, and a very dangerous opponent even in December 1944. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon, details in the description box below.